Hey guys, welcome back to another Cinema 4D tutorial. As the title says, this one is going to be about Arnold Renderer and applying labels. Now I know that I've already made a couple of tutorials on this topic before, but I wanted to go back and talk about it again because with some of the latest updates to Arnold, this process of applying labels has become so much easier now compared to previous versions. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just create a base material. So I'm going to create an Arnold standard surface. I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm going to drag that onto my cube. Then I'm going to create another one. And this is the one that I'm going to use for the label. So I'm going to change the color over to black. I'm going to open up the network editor. And what I want to do is bring in a texture that's going to be used for the alpha channel. So there's two ways of doing that. We can do a search over here for image, and that will bring up the image node. You can click on that and drag it in, and that will bring up a window for you to go search to whatever location your file is at, or you can just drag one in. So seeing as how this is an Arnold tutorial, I'm just going to take this Arnold image here, and I'm just going to click and drag and drop that in, and that will bring up that image for us already inside of an image node. Now there's something very important here that I quickly want to point out. This image is exactly 1500 by 1500. That's the dimensions. And it's very important that you take your texture files and you prep them before you bring them into Cinema 4D, especially if you're going to be using them with flat projection, which is what we're going to be doing here in this tutorial. You want to make sure that your textures are a 1-to-1 ratio. And let me just quickly show you why they need to be 1-to-1. So I'm just going to create a new file just really quick here. I'm going to create a cube and I'm going to just put a material on it. Let's just say that our label material is going to be in there. We'll change it over to flat projection. So with the material tag and the object selected, we want to enable texture mode as well as axis mode. And when we do that, you can see a yellow grid appears. I'm just going to pull this off to the side. Pay close attention to the aspect ratio of this yellow grid. It is exactly 1-to-1. It's a square ratio. This is the ratio that's going to be used when this grid projects your image onto your object. So if you have an image that's 16 by 9, 4 by 3, or some other ratio, and you don't prep it ahead of time, that means that image is either going to be squashed or stretched in order to fit this 1-to-1 grid. So I always like to prep my images ahead of time in Photoshop to make sure that it's a 1-to-1 ratio. That way I don't have to use the scale tool in order to squash and stretch this grid to get things to line up properly. Alright, so back over to the main file. So what I'm going to do now is let's open this back up again. And what we want to do is we want to connect this image node with our alpha texture. We want to connect that to the standard surface input, and we want to connect it to geometry, cutout, opacity. And that's basically all you have to do. So we'll close that out. And now we can drop this as the second material. Make sure that this label material is on the right-hand side. I'm going to open up the IPR now because we need to see exactly where this image is going to be placed. So immediately you can see that this label is appearing all over the place. And the reason for that is because by default, the material is set to UVW mapping. So I'm going to change this over to flat. I'm going to disable tile because we don't want to tile it. I'm going to select the material label tag as well as the object. We want to enable the texture mode and the axis mode. And I'm going to pull this over. Use the rotate tool just to spin it around 90 degrees. And then I'm going to shrink it down. Now notice when we shrink it down, in the IPR window, it's just a black square. So if we were to click once on the material tag for the label, we get 3 tabs: basic, tag, and coordinates. But if we double click it, now we have some new tabs to pop up. So let's click on the alpha stacking. The mode by default is set to none. So if we open up this drop-down menu, it's going to give us 3 different options: texture, shader, and shader network. What we want to use is a shader because that's what we're using here with this standard surface shader. So we're going to click on shader. Now it's going to ask us for which shader it is, and it's the one with the Arnold new logo image node. Now notice that it's still a black square, so we need to disable use alpha channel, and as soon as we do, now the label appears. And that's basically how you apply labels now. It's so much easier this way versus having to UV map your object or using camera projection or some other method. Now what if you want to apply multiple labels? Well, you can do that. All you have to do is just control click and drag over to duplicate it. And I will do the same for this material down here. And I'm just going to change the color on this one over to a bright green color. And let me disable or turn the IPR off so that will update. And then we can just drag that on top of that duplicated material tag. Alright, so now if we just grab the move tool and move that up, you can see that both labels are still there. And you can do this as many times as you want. I don't think there's a limit on how many labels you can apply this way. Now there's one other way of doing this, which is using texture mode. So if we were to double click on this second material tag, and we want to change the mode from shader over to texture. Now it's asking us for the actual texture file. So we'll just load in that Arnold logo, disable image alpha, and there you go. So you can see that both of these options work the same way, just depends on which one you want to use. Now there's one more thing I quickly want to mention. If we were to orbit around to the back side of the cube, you can see that the labels are there, but they're reversed. And that's because this is being projected through the object onto the back side. Now if you're using V-Ray, this is where you run into a problem, because the only workaround to get rid of this is to split off your geometry into multiple sections or use set selections. But with V-Ray, you cannot use set selections and flat projection labels that use an alpha channel. For some reason, it just does not work. However, now with Arnold, all you have to do is select the material tags with the labels and change the side option here from both to front. And now it disappears off of the back, but it is still there on the front. Alright, so that's pretty much how you apply labels using Arnold and flat projection. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video. It was a pretty short one, but as you can see, it's pretty easy to do this now. No longer a complicated issue. So as always, guys, thank you for watching. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to comment below, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.